correct.
Oh, that's all right. Because normally we just have the bit in the middle.
Yeah, we're getting there. There in a second.
Okay.
Okay, so underneath his wings, we're on the study number 3, a proposal. So the story so far, if you remember, Ruth and Naomi have returned from Moab to Bethlehem as widows. They are very vulnerable, but Ruth is a strapping lass by the sound of things, and she undertakes to provide for them both by gleaning. And fortunately, that's in inverted commas, Ruth gleans in the fields of Boaz, who is an honourable man. He's a person who's standing in the community, and he turns out to be a member of their clan, of the family of Elimelech. And it's the time of harvest. The harvest of the barley takes place, and Ruth then carries on working with the serving girls in Boaz's field. And then following that, the wheat harvest. So it would have taken a couple of months to get both of those harvests in. And now the harvest is in, and a more permanent future has to be decided on for the women. Matters are about to come to a head. So let's read Ruth chapter 3. One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you, where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourselves, and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. And when Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down on the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he's not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here till morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized, and he said, "Don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." And when she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and put it on her. And then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" And then she told her everything Boaz had done for her, and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happened. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Okay. So something interesting has been happening to Naomi during the course of the story. If you remember, at the start, she is completely locked in grief and depression, and she declares that she'd gone out full and come back empty, that her life is empty. Everything has been stripped away from her. And she seems to be almost frozen, unable to do anything except sort of grieve. But as the story has gone on, the harvest has begun to bring some hope into the situation, and it started to awaken. And in practical terms, the larder at Ruth and Naomi's house has been refilled, and Naomi is beginning to feel, if not quite full, at least not quite so empty as she did before. And she's beginning to reassess the resources she had left. She left saying, I've got nothing, not noticing that she had this rather marvellous woman as a daughter-in-law, who's been looking after her all the time. And she's beginning to think, what has she got left, and what can she do? And this situation with Boaz, he seems to be kindly disposed towards Ruth. How can Naomi bring the situation to a head? And so, as the sort of the end of the harvest, as in cultures all over the world, there's a bit of a party at the sort of evening of the harvest, and Naomi coaches Ruth in what she should do and how to approach Boaz. Now, of course, marriage customs differ from place to place and time to time. I don't suppose they were expecting to have a wedding cake like that one for Ruth, and even things are changing as we go. I mean, my dad was a bit disappointed that Chris wouldn't ask for my hand in marriage, whereas I'd have been furious if he had done, because I considered it was my hand and I was going to dispose of it. But you know,
My son-in-law's had to ask.
don't they? Things change, and this is obviously a very different sort of set of customs. And so I'm going to try and explain as much as we know and as much as we can gather about what exactly is going on here, because it seems a little shocking to us in some ways what Ruth does. She creeps up to a man who's had perhaps a few drinks at the threshing floor and creeps into bed with him, and it seems a slightly forward, rather odd thing to do for someone who's supposedly so very virtuous. And it probably wasn't the usual form of marriage proposal that they had at the time. You would expect, I think, under normal circumstances, that one family would approach the other family and say, well, what about marrying your son to my daughter, and would try and sort of arrange a meeting of the families and decide it, you know, in consultation with the young people, but decide it sort of on a sort of a family to family basis. But this is a different situation. Ruth is making a kind of formal legal appeal to Boaz for her rights, for him to act as her kinsman redeemer. Now, if you remember this kinsman redeemer thing, it's a sort of a legal status in ancient Israel. There's a word for it, goel, and so a goel had a number of functions. They were a senior member of each family, each clan, each tribe, and they were the sort of head of the family. And it was considered that they had a duty to look after all the other members of the family. And they had certain duties that they were supposed to perform if they were, you know, admitting their position as a kinsman redeemer. So a kinsman redeemer should buy back family land. If someone, because if you remember, the family land is part of the inheritance that's been given in the promised land by God to the tribes and down through the tribes to the clans and the families. And so there was something that they really felt very strongly, that family land should not go out of the family, because it was their inheritance, not so much from fathers to sons, but as from God himself. And so it was their connection to the covenant. And so if a family member had to sell their land or sell a lease on their land, probably we would call it in our terms, then the Goel would, if they could, buy that land back so that it didn't go out of the family. They were supposed to redeem family members who were sold into slavery. I guess if you didn't have any land to sell, you could sell your labour. This is more a sort of a debt bondage kind of slavery, where you know, if you can't pay your debts, you try and pay them off with labour. And if a family member gets into that situation, the Goel, the kinsman redeemer, is supposed to sort that out. Is supposed, if they can, to buy them out of that slavery. That's a Goel is also supposed to be the person who avenges a relative. If somebody murders your relative, you're supposed to be the one who seeks justice for them. The avenger of blood, it's translated in some parts of the Bible. It's a sort of a sacred responsibility to seek justice for your relative. So, of course, if you don't have a police force, you can't call in CID. But if somebody has murdered your relative, you under the law, you're entitled to seek justice for them. And it's that seeking justice aspect that, if you remember when you were studying Job, that's the kind of kinsman redeemer that Job is asking God to be for him, the one who will testify for him that he's innocent, that he hasn't done anything terrible and bad, the one who will stand up for him in court. He's asking God himself to be his kinsman redeemer. So that's another function of the kinsman redeemer. But the one we're thinking about now, in particular, is this one: this duty to provide an heir for a childless widow. So if a man dies childless and he leaves a widow, again, they don't want his inheritance to go out of the family. They don't want his name to be forgotten. That's the purpose of all these genealogies that you find in the Bible. That's why they're important, because they show your connection to your family and your connection to the covenant, to the promises of God. And so what Ruth is asking for here is provide an heir for Elimelech. Elimelech, remember, has died, and then his two sons have died as well. And that's an absolute tragedy, because it means that the family line dies out, unless someone can do something to ensure that someone will carry sort of Elimelech's memory, and Mahlon, his son, Ruth's late husband's memory, down through the years. If someone will be that and inherit any land that goes with that. So that's what Ruth is asking for. I want you to provide me with an heir for my late husband, and incidentally, that provides inheritance and protection for her as well. And so she's asking for that. She's asking for this kind of marriage, and it's, in a technical term, it's called a levirate marriage. And most usually it could be another brother of the deceased, but there aren't any brothers. So it would appear that you could look around for other relatives, other potential relatives who might marry and provide that heir. And so Ruth is formally asking Boaz to give her this kind of marriage, to find her someone who will give her that kind of marriage.
So is it like the coming under the corner? Is that like coming under his protection?
That's right. Yes, she's asking. He says, "Who are you?" And that's not surprising. In the middle of the night, find somebody down by his feet are cold. But she says, "I am your servant Ruth." She said, "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." So that seems to be a sort of a formal legal, asking for protection, asking for you to cover me. And apparently there are in the Middle East, in certain areas, there are sort of marriage rites that involve sort of putting the corner of the garment over the bride, coming under your protection. In fact, the word that is used for the corner of the garment is actually in Hebrew the same as the word for wings. So what she actually literally says is, spread your wings over me. And if you remember, Boaz, when he met Ruth in the fields right at the beginning of chapter 2, he says, may the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge.
Amen.
So Boaz has prayed for Ruth that she will have the Lord's protection. And now, he's being asked to become the answer to his own prayer, to actually be the way that God protects Ruth, provides protection for a widow, by spreading his protection over her. And God in the scriptures has a particular care for the widow and the fatherless. Throughout the Bible, they quite often are the recipients of miracles. So you might be able to think of some of the stories of widows in the Bible and how God helps them directly. But his care is also seen in his people acting according to the law. So we're back on this theme again, that the law works if people do it. That God's law actually works if people do it. But if people act according to the law, then God's care actually is demonstrated to the vulnerable and the poor. There aren't any destitute widows because they are cared for. They are brought into a family. And so Boaz is being asked to do that for Ruth, and to bring her into his family. And Boaz praises Ruth, and says that she is a woman of honor. She is a woman of noble character. And that actually parallels it's a similar expression. Do you remember when Boaz was introduced to us at the beginning of chapter 2 as an upstanding man, or it's actually a similar expression. So there's a very great equality between Ruth and Boaz in the story. You might think of them as mismatched. He's the powerful landowner and she's the destitute widow. But actually, there's a sort of a moral equivalence between them and the way that God looks at them, because they're both, and the way that the society looks at them, because they are both honourable people. They are people of noble character. And Ruth has demonstrated that by her looking after Naomi, by her sheer hard work, by refusing to desert her mother-in-law in her distress, and by and what Boaz says here is that actually you have a choice. You don't have to do this. She's highly marriageable. She might be a widow with and destitute, but she's young. She's obviously fit, and she's obviously an extremely hard worker. And so it would appear that she's probably become someone who would be quite admired in the community. So it probably wouldn't have been that difficult to find a husband for herself. But the trouble would be, if she did that, that would leave Naomi completely on her own, high and dry, and there would be no one to remember Elimelech's name and Mahlon, Chilion, and all the rest of the family. That would that line would just die out. There'd be no heir to inherit their part of the community. And so Boaz is saying, you're being even more honourable, not just by looking after Naomi and incidentally looking after herself by gleaning and staying with her, but also by doing this, by keeping the law, by asking for this marriage. And he indicates here that he's perhaps not a young man. So she's making a choice. She's making a choice to go with Boaz. But just as we think everything's going to sort of rolling downhill smoothly, that everything's going to work out beautifully, there's a snag. And I love the way the storyteller tells this, brings this in just at this point, just to sort of, just as you think it make the story exciting. There is apparently another closer relative who has a prior claim to act as Goel. And it might be that Naomi and Ruth were reluctant to sort of act too quickly, in actually sort of directly asking for Boaz's help, because they weren't sure how he would react. Maybe there was someone else, they knew of this someone else who could act, and were waiting for one of them to do something about it. But Boaz says that he will make an approach to the other relative, and if he won't marry her, then Boaz will. He's going to do something about this situation. Ruth is going to basically be engaged by the end of the day. And then he does something more than is required of him. He gives Ruth yet another large gift of grain to take home to Naomi. He doesn't have to do that. It's not in the legal requirements. It's out of just sheer generosity and kindness, and it's an expression, I think, of goodwill, saying yes, a message, if you like, to Naomi, that I'm going to see you all right. I'm going to sort this out. So we come to the end of that chapter, and next week we'll be thinking about how it all resolves. The final chapter, the resolution to the story. Okay.